Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 36th California Small Farm Conference. My name is Guido Lois. I'm a Communications and Events Manager with CAF, which stands for Community Alliance with Family Farmers. We have an amazing panel today, the last workshop of the day. But before I let them speak, I just wanted to do a little logistics. First of all, this workshop is being recorded, just so you know. And we wanted to ask you if you have any questions during the workshop, that you put them using the Q&A feature that you can find at the bottom of your screen on that little menu. If it's not appearing, it's got to be under more. And if you have any comments, you can put it on the chat. So we're trying to use those separately because then it's easier to read questions after the speakers have finished. I also wanted to thank our sponsors for making this possible. And I think that's all I have to say. I'm going to let the speakers speak. Thank you so much to all of you for being here. And I'll see you at the end of the workshop.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to share my screen. My name is Carolyn, and I'll be presenting with the rest of my team today. So give me 1 second. All right, can everyone see my screen okay? Maybe if I get some thumbs up from my co-presenters. Okay, great. So my name is Carolyn Chelius, and I'm here with my other presenters. Will present in a second. But we're here to talk about farm to corrections, growing relationships between California farmers and state prisons. So as I said, my name is Carolyn, and I am a project policy analyst at the University of California Nutrition Policy Institute, which is a nonprofit based out of the University of California, focused on evaluating policies and programs aimed at increasing access to healthy food. And so I'm also speaking here today with Hyla Gantan of Impact Justice. Hyla, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Impact Justice?
Sure. Thanks, Carolyn. Hi, everyone. My name is Hyla Gantan. I am a senior program associate with the Food in Prison project at Impact Justice. And Impact Justice and NPI have been working together as the Farm to Corrections California team. We're really excited to present to you all today in partnership, actually, with our project partners. And I'll go ahead and hand it off to Hope from Spork.
Hi, I am Hope Cipolla. I am co-owner of Spork Food Hub and Fiery Ginger Farm with my business partner, Shane Zerilligan, who is not here today. He's speaking on another panel. And we started as a small farm that sold mainly to schools, and then worked our way into a food hub, and we currently work mostly with institutions like schools, universities, hospitals, and now prisons, and we're excited to be here.
Thank you, Hope.
I was just going to introduce Lance. So you're beat me to it.
Lance. Thanks, Lance.
Thank you all. And, my name is Lance Eshelman. I am the Departmental Food Administrator for the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. I am one of the institutions that Hope and her team works with in the correctional setting. I am located in Sacramento, California, in the headquarters building, but I have worked at 5 different correctional facilities, all the way from Blythe, California, up to Ione, and now here in headquarters, and happy to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Lance. So I also just want to acknowledge the other members of our team who are written on the slide, but who aren't presenting with us today. And then also nonprofit Change Lab Solutions also played a big part in the first round of this research. So I'd like to give them their credit as well. All right, this project was made possible through funding from the U.S. Department of Agriculture Specialty Crop Block Grant, and none of us have any conflicts of interest to disclose. So I'm going to turn it over to Hyla, who's going to talk a little bit about the motivation behind this project.
Thanks, Carolyn. So our Farm to Corrections California work was really motivated by our shared interest in promoting the health of marginalized communities. And our goal was to promote the health of residents within the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation by increasing access to California-grown fruits and vegetables. So what we've learned is that CDCR, which is the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, is the largest state purchaser of food, spending about $150 million and is charged for feeding about 100,000 residents per year. But also what we've learned that in these types of settings, food choice is extremely limited. And for some folks who don't have outside support, that food choice is really non-existent. But CDCR has made some efforts to improve the statewide menu. And Lance, can you go ahead and speak a little bit about what has been done so far?
Sure. Yeah, and like Hyla had mentioned, sometimes the food options, there's not a vast pool there because we are feeding a standardized menu. And so anywhere from a resident up in Northern California, Pelican Bay near the Oregon coast, all the way down to Richard J. Donovan down in San Diego, we are typically feeding every 90 to 100,000 individuals in our care essentially the same food option. So we try to standardize it as much as possible. And so doing this work for the past 15 years now, I started in the department in 2009. We've come a long way. We started with 3,600 calories per day, feeding a lot of starchy items, 6 pieces of bread every day on average, beans sometimes twice a day. And we really wanted to look at the health of the population. And we could see by the numbers that healthcare was presenting that the folks in our care weren't doing the best that they could. And so we really started looking at the menu. And back in 2016, we worked closely with the Department of Finance, the Budget Management Branch, as well as our healthcare folks in CDCR or CCHCS, the California Correctional Health Services, and really decided to make a move at improving our menu. And so we reduced the calories that we were serving day to day to 2,400 calories to fit the body composition of our average population. Really didn't need 3,600 calories. And we also looked at all the carbs and those starchy food items and reduced those items and started introducing more fruits and vegetables. And so while we did reduce our calorie count, the cost that we were spending on each individual actually increased because sometimes feeding those healthier options does cost more. And so like I had mentioned, in 2016, we began to introduce more fresh fruits and vegetables. And here we are, 2024, still serving a good amount of fruits and vegetables, but really looking at improving the options that we have for that fresh produce. Typically within our menu, you see a lot of apples, you see a lot of bananas, because those are really the easiest option for us, and it is cost effective, right? So we're paying about 12 cents per serving, but we really want to expand that. The old saying, an apple a day, but for me and for a lot of people, you don't want to eat that same fruit every day. And some of these folks in our care have been in our care for 30 years. And so we understand that a variety is definitely needed. And so working with the Farm to Corrections team, we're seeing some really good improvements that we want to speak more about today. Thank you, Heather.
Thanks for that context, Lance. And also too, maybe if y'all aren't familiar with some of the locations of some of these prison facilities, oftentimes they're located in very rural agricultural areas. And with California actually being ranked as the #1 agricultural state, it's not common that local produce reaches the incarcerated population. So of course, the Farm to Corrections California team saw this as an opportunity to make those two bridge together. Next slide, please, Carolyn. Thank you. So for folks returning home after incarceration, individuals really experience poor health after their time within the system. Again, going back to the limited food choices, as Lance mentioned, they've recently improved the menu, but if you're thinking about folks who have spent significant amount of time in these facilities, that can really cause a lot of harm and damage to people's bodies over many, many years. So what we also have learned is that individuals have trouble identifying, purchasing, and preparing healthy food after incarceration. This can really stem from traumatic experience, not just during incarceration, but even before, which can exacerbate challenges, including prolonged periods of food insecurity. And so what we've seen many times is people normalizing some responses to the food environment, either that they've experienced while inside or even growing up. So we've heard a lot about feelings of hunger, constant feelings of hunger when people are incarcerated. And so the options that are available to them, like Lance mentioned, is very limited. So they do have some stores inside of facilities, but they carry very shelf-stable foods, convenience types of foods. And so it's very likely for individuals to continue to reach for these items and continue with these convenience foods and preparation methods when entering into society, especially when facing some financial difficulties or even time constraints when having to fulfill the obligations for people who are on parole. So I've included a photo on this slide here. It may be small, I'm not sure how well everyone can see it, but on the left side, this is a true screenshot of a conversation that I've had with a dear friend who has also experienced the carceral system. And what you see in that photo is a bowl of top ramen noodles with some pork rinds and some chips for flavoring. And so this is very typical. This is a typical meal that you would see residents make for themselves to try and stave off the hunger that they experience. And as you can see, the little note right at the bottom of that photo says, been institutionalized for a long time. So that really does speak to the condition of folks experiencing, trying to eat, trying to find some healthy or some food really after incarceration. Next slide, please. Thank you. So why do we want to increase the amount of fresh produce within CDCR? Well, at the individual level, it improves the nutrition and overall health of individuals. And it's not just the physical health, but mental and emotional health as well. After speaking with residents, they just so appreciate the efforts that are made to improve the variety of fresh food available to them. And this is, whole fresh fruits and vegetable items that they themselves can have the opportunity to prepare in ways that they would like. Specifically with increasing California grown products, it increases the fruits and vegetables. Increasing fruits and vegetables does provide economic benefits to local growers and businesses. And so what better person to speak to that would be Hope. Hope, can you talk a little bit about market channels and other things that come to mind?
Sure. We are excited to be part of this because as a food hub, we're able to bring in lots of smaller California growers who wouldn't otherwise be able to access that. So we can aggregate smaller amounts of produce into larger amounts of produce to meet CDCR's needs, which is really exciting. It also gives opportunities for those farms that are typically BIPOC farmers who are typically not able to access these markets are able to access these markets in this way. It allows us to kind of be in the middle to do all of the distribution, paperwork, and marketing.
Thanks, Hope. And after, helping smaller farmers and individuals by increasing the amount of fruits and vegetables, it really comes around full circle. And it does so because it helps improve the health, safety, and the resiliency of the communities that these individuals return home to. We really do believe that when people are nourished and whose basic needs are met, they're able to return to society ready to contribute back to their communities and also reduce any chances of returning back to the system. And so now Carolyn will talk a little bit more about our farm to corrections research along with the programs that we've created under our project.
Thanks, Hyla. So for our farm to corrections team, we've kind of broken down our work into two main buckets, which we consider our research and our programming. So on the research side, we've conducted state and national level policy scans, which we'll talk a little bit about, as well as interviews with state and national stakeholders. So these are people from growers, corrections folks, people who have experienced incarceration, policymakers, others who can kind of inform what possibilities are out there as far as increasing local procurement inside of corrections facilities. And then we've also conducted programming. So one of the things we're going to talk a lot about today, and which we've partnered with CDCR and Spork Food Hub on, is our Harvest of the Month project. And then we've also conducted nutrition education workshops for system impacted individuals. So our Harvest of the Month project is actually increasing access to fresh produce inside of state prisons. And then our nutrition education workshops are meant to increase access to fresh produce, increase nutrition education for people healing from and returning home from incarceration. So I'll start by talking about our research. The first of which was a California state policy scan. And this was one of the things that we did in partnership with Change Lab Solutions, which I had mentioned earlier. So we looked through California state policy to see, are there any policies on the books that can actually help increase procurement of locally grown California produce? So we found that both AB 822 and 778 are both on the books, which can help to institutions be able to purchase California grown produce. So AB 822 provides a 5% price preference for California grown produce purchased by state-run institutions. So for example, if a hospital or a prison wants to purchase California grown oranges, they're able to purchase them if they're, say, $1.05, and are looking to compare those with oranges from Florida that are $1 a pound or something. And then we also have AB 778, which is a little bit stricter, and that requires state-run institutions to purchase at least 60% of their agricultural food products from California. So Lance may speak about some of these later on when we're talking about Harvest of the Month, but these policies can be kind of leveraged to help states or state institutions comply and to actually procure more California grown produce. However, we have found through our policy scans that neither policy really has enforcement mechanisms. It's not built into the actual policy language. So it's been really challenging to track how well these are enforced, how well they're utilized. And that's something that we would like to kind of keep track of and see whether or not these can continue to be leveraged, even if they don't have the enforcement, or maybe we could build the enforcement into them. So now I'm going to turn it over to Hyla, who's going to talk more about our interviews with stakeholders, starting with formerly incarcerated individuals.
Thanks, Carolyn. So after speaking with a number of formerly incarcerated individuals, along with some currently incarcerated through some site visits, we've learned that there is a strong demand for increased access to fresh food items. Like I mentioned earlier, this would support the health of those individuals and reduce the feelings of hunger. But it would, I think what is really important is to allow them to feel a sense of normalcy. So some residents have really talked about not being able to consume a favorite fruit. I think strawberries was something that came up often. Berries come up very often when talking to folks. And again, some residents go for a number of years, even decades, without seeing a certain fruit that they grew up eating. It can also be very difficult to find fresh fruits and vegetables. And if they can find it, it can be very costly at the same time. There's also increased access to, it would also be difficult to find a good variety of fruits and vegetables inside. As Lance mentioned, there is a common theme of apples and bananas and occasional orange, just depending on the facility. And so as you can imagine, it could be very difficult. Here we have a quote on the screen. It says, "I wish we could get more fruit. That would be nice, but it's not that much food that we get. We get like an apple every single day or banana every probably twice a week, but for the most part, we really don't get any fruit." So really just that emphasis of wanting more fresh items. Next slide, please. Thanks. So after speaking with corrections staff, we've learned that food managers and food service departments would be open to serving more fruits and vegetables, but they either anticipate or have experienced challenges when doing so. Some of the challenges to supplying more fruits and vegetables, I think Lance would be the best person to speak on that. So I'll actually hand it over to him.
Thank you, Hyla, and really good insight there. I appreciate that. One of the bills that was mentioned earlier was Assembly Bill 778. And when we're looking at the different challenges with introducing more fruits and vegetables, it really does come down to the budget constraints. You know, when we are looking at those apples and bananas, yes, we are purchasing in large quantities, but even those same quantities with something like a plum, maybe just a little bit more. And so the bananas and the apples maintain their consistency within our menu. However, with Assembly Bill 778, it really does give the Department of Corrections that ability to purchase other California grown produce. You know, again, apples and bananas, you really don't hear that is a common fruit in California. Apples, yes, we have those, you know, 3 or 4 times out of the month. And of course, Hope could speak more to that. But really, the bananas are usually not coming from California. But yes, Assembly Bill 778 does help us. But as it was also mentioned, there is no enforcement behind Assembly Bill 778, which does again require the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation to purchase 60% of our agriculture and our produce from a California grown source. And so we did talk about a little bit about Harvest of the Month, and I believe we'll get more into that as this presentation continues. But really, that was the beginning steps to figure out, hey, what is out there? What can we place on our menu that won't break the taxpayer's budget, but also be able to comply with Assembly Bill 778? So budget constraints is always a big concern. We are limited to a certain amount. Cost per inmate per day is what we refer to. And again, it's not very much, but we do what we can. And the safety concerns, when we're talking about more fruits and vegetables, some of you may have heard of what we refer to in the California Department of Corrections as Pruno. Pruno is a prison manufactured wine, which of course is used with, you know, common ingredients found in the kitchen: bread, apples, you know, potatoes we often see being used to make a certain type of alcohol. And so while we don't structure our menu with those considerations in mind, it is something that is discussed, right? Do we want to provide an ample amount of grapes to an incarcerated individual, where that individual has the ability to take them back, make some prison wine with it? And of course, at the end of the day, we're worried about the actions that happen after consumption of wine. It's not the consumption of wine itself. We are living in a somewhat toxic environment, and we're fearful of harm to other incarcerated individuals and of course our staff. So things like that, things like jalapenos, right? Jalapenos are used to make capsaicin, or excuse me, they have capsaicin in them, which is used to make pepper spray. And of course, pepper spray can then be used in a situation with, you know, whether it's the incarcerated individual on another incarcerated individual or staff. So some of those safety concerns go into it. The menu requirements, right? We want to make sure that we're providing the appropriate amount of calories, carbs, fats, sodium, so on and so forth. And then the equipment and infrastructure. Many of these prisons are 30 years old. A lot of the equipment is not consistent throughout the state of California when we're talking about the California Department of Corrections. And when it is consistent, sometimes it's not always reliable. And so is one institution, correctional facility, going to have that same equipment and the same process for purchasing the fruits and vegetables, breaking it down, whether it's inside a centralized kitchen using knives and things like that? And then are we going to have equipment to prepare that the same way across the board. So these are just some of the concerns that we have when it comes to purchasing fruits and vegetables. Thank you, Hyla. Thank you for asking that. Appreciate that.
Yeah, and thanks for speaking on that. Another thing that came up too in our interviews was that the food service staff, they do prefer vendors that can handle large volume requirements. As I mentioned, they're responsible for feeding nearly 100,000 people every single day. And so also if they have to substitute something at the last minute, their bigger, larger vendors are more equipped to do so, or they feel more confident that they are equipped to do so. So we're still, trying to figure out what would be the best way to support smaller farms and growers to establish that channel for CDCR. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we've spoken with procurement experts, and what we've learned is that there is some confusion surrounding competing vendor preference policies, even down to defining what California grown versus California produced actually means in the process. So something that we've heard also about forward contracting agreements, while it can be beneficial for both the department and growers to anticipate future produce items, unforeseen circumstances like inclement weather seasons can actually negatively affect these agreements and leave them unfulfilled. Next slide, please. We've spoken with growers and distributors, and we've learned that local farmers may not be equipped to complete the administrative paperwork that's required to become a state vendor. And that could be for a number of reasons. It could just be that they don't have enough staff, or maybe that they're not strong in their technical skills, so they're not able to really understand the different types of paperwork involved. The competitive bidding process that's required by the state also rarely allows for some of these smaller businesses to win bids against the larger vendors. And so, Hope, can you kind of speak to what this is like?
Sure. I think from our perspective, becoming a vendor was probably the easiest part of it all. That part was pretty straightforward. It's just a little bit of paperwork, tax ID number, small business, certified small business verification, and a seller's permit, which were all pretty easy. And then it can be a little bit of a waiting period. So I think there was probably like a month or more in between the time we filled out the paperwork and the time that everything was all ready to go and we could actually make a sale. And there is definitely some waiting time between the bidding process and the final sale, particularly with Harvest of the Month, because, and I know Lance is going to talk more about this, but we're just identifying one item per month. So from the time it's selected to the time it actually goes out can be 4 weeks or more. So that can create issues on the farm side. If they sell out faster than anticipated, if something happens with the weather and the crop is damaged in some way, or they just can't meet the specific size requirements. Some items change throughout a season, specifically fruit, the size of the fruit. And so we're trying to get a certain number of servings per case. And sometimes that changes throughout the season. And there is a gap in time between when we tell the farmer, yes, this bid has been completed and we'd like to purchase X number of cases from you, and the time that they actually deliver it and we send it to the prisons. So that can be a little complicated. The bidding process is also, it's not guaranteed when we fill out a general produce bid. So through the Harvest of the Month, as we'll talk about, that purchase is currently guaranteed. But a general produce bid and after the pilot is over will not be guaranteed. So it can be tricky to contact your growers looking for a large quantity and then tell them that it's also not guaranteed and that the price needs to maintain. It needs to be a steady price. Like we can't change the price once we put the bid in. So that part can also be a little bit tricky for farmers. But by and large, farmers have been really supportive and excited about this program. And they see the potential that it could have. So they are willing to hold prices as much as they can. But it has been a little bit tricky. And then, fair price. CDCR is working on a small budget, so prices are lower than schools even, which a lot of people think is difficult to work with. So really, we're working on the fact that we can purchase a very large quantity and that it makes sense for the farmer to want to work with us on that purchase. And sometimes it doesn't work, and we're very honest, farmers are very honest, and they just say, hey, that price doesn't really work for me. And so we have to either look for another grower or look for another item. And we understand that at Spork, we're also farmers. Not every item is going to work for this particular outlet. It's the same with any kind of large wholesale outlet. Not every crop will make sense for a farmer to sell wholesale. Yeah, so there's definitely some challenges when it comes to pricing and bidding and all of those things.
Thanks so much, Hope. Next slide, please. Thank you. So after speaking with our interviews with policymakers, we did get a little bit more context around the preference policies, as Carolyn shared earlier. What we've learned in these interviews was that there are no tracking mechanisms for source of origin written into the bill language, and that mainly had to do with fiscal implications, which does make it difficult to collect information on how, if at all, these policies are being implemented. So this is a direct quote from some of the staffers, and it says, a lot of times when bills move out and if they get signed, unless there's some specific reporting requirement back to the legislator, we don't really have a lot of insight how an agency even goes about implementing a bill. They're not required to follow up, on what their plans are. But thankfully, and this is something that came up in early conversations with Lance and trying to get someone on board within the department, having these kinds of bills really does allow project teams like ours to work with state departments and also with food hubs like Spork. Next slide, please. And lastly, our interviews with academics and prison reform advocates really taught us, really cemented the idea that it does take a champion from within to help increase fruits and vegetables across the facilities. And so thankfully, we have Lance on board, but Lance was not the first person that we communicated with in the department. Within our 2.5 years before we were able to really establish a relationship with the department, we've experienced, quite a bit of turnover. And so we've learned throughout this process that champion turnover can be an issue. And again, top-down support really is needed to help push the change. So as much as, I've mentioned about legislation really pushing us in the department to work together, listening to the experiences of people who are currently incarcerated and their families and loved ones who are on the outside trying to gather support is all very necessary in order for change to be a sustainable change. Next slide, please. Okay, and so with all this information, we've created 2 programs under our project. The first one, next slide, please, being our Harvest of the Month program. So for those who may not be familiar with Harvest of the Month, what we do is we introduce one new item one time a month to the incarcerated population. And although it is one item once a month, this very small change can make a big difference to the impacted population. So through this program, we were able to connect CDCR with local growers, help CDCR comply with those local procurement policies that we mentioned, also help the department integrate local produce into resident meals, and also evaluate the success of the program and its ability to scale up and to scale out. Okay, and actually at this point, I'd like to pass it off to Hope, who can maybe talk about how our partnership came to be under Harvest of the Month and maybe some challenges and opportunities in the process.
Sure. Yeah, as I kind of said in the intro, Shane and I, there's Shane in that picture right there. Shane and I are both farmers, and we own now Spork Food Hub, which was started in 2021. So we're just a couple of years old, and we've been farming for almost 10 years now. So, you know, that's not exactly new to us, but it's been great. We started our farm with kind of this idea of selling mainly to schools to get as much good produce into schools, but we're a pretty small farm. We're about 5 acres and we have a small 200 tree orchard. So we thought we really need to start Spork so that we can make a greater impact and open up a market for other small farms like ourselves. Um, uh, One of the, and so Hyla found us, I think just found us somehow. I'm not exactly sure how, and emailed us and asked if we'd be interested in speaking to her about this Harvest of the Month program. Harvest of the Month is kind of something that we also do with schools. It's kind of like a first step to local produce. So as we use it with schools, it gives them also one item per month that they showcase either on their salad bar or their lunch menus. So that kiddos can have like extra exposure to fresh fruits and vegetables, kind of the same as it works within prisons. It's giving the inmates extra exposure and access to fresh fruits and vegetables. The benefits of this program are definitely that we're opening up this market for small farms, like I said, and family farms, farms of all sizes, actually, and BIPOC farmers. And the previous picture was Sherman Produce in Fresno, who we worked with watermelons. And it's exciting to see, that the inmates are also excited about some variety in their diets. They've had watermelon, pluots, butternut, mandarins, and March is going to be grapefruit, probably not something they see very often. And the farmers are telling us that these larger volume sales are super helpful to them. Our mandarins came from JJ Citrus, and he is, I think, a third generation Korean family farmer, and he was super excited to have the outlet. He was basically just accessing farmers markets at the time, which are great for farmers, but also not a high volume, large quantity sale. And so, we were able to take pallets of mandarins for this Harvest of the Month program, which was super exciting to him. And I think also some of the grapefruit are going to be coming from him as well. And it creates a sustainability for small farms that wasn't there before. And that's exactly what we were hoping for. The challenges are that, like I stated before, the time frames between bids and when we actually takes the harvest. So sometimes we have to make the choice. Do we actually purchase said produce a week or two before we're going to deliver it and store it, just to be sure that everything goes according to plan? Or do we have a couple of backup farms just in case something happens with this harvest? Most often we just have a backup farm in case, but it can be challenging on our end because we're not guaranteeing a sale for that farm at that point. We're just asking them, might you have X number of pallets of fruit available on this date? Now, because Spork also works with other institutions, we're kind of able to buffer that for farmers. So that means sometimes we might actually purchase fruit from 2 farms and sell some to schools and some to prisons, just to make sure that the quantities are available when those corrections deliveries turn up, because it's usually the 3rd week of the month. Opportunities, I think there's a great opportunity to grow this as we move forward. We're seeing a lot of interest with the nutrition staff about purchasing for their general produce bids, which is pretty exciting. I wasn't actually sure that was ever going to happen, but we've had quite a few, maybe 10 general produce bids come through, which is, all of the items that they bid on in a current month. Now, the challenges with that is that Spork is just local California grown produce. We don't do any frozen, and we don't do anything prepackaged or processed. So some of those frozen items are also on the general bids. And those bids are all or nothing, meaning if you can't bid on all the items, then they throw the bid out and go to the person who can purchase or can supply all of those items. So it's a little bit tricky to, the food service staff do have options to purchase purchase produce, just produce based on a bid that's just per each item. However, I guess trying to work with staff to get them to do that is a whole nother step for them and a whole lot more paperwork. And so I completely understand why it is that most often bids come to us all or nothing. However, there are lots of folks out there that are trying to send us bids for just 1 or 2 items that they think are seasonal, which is super helpful. And then it just comes down to price. Who's the lowest price? So price is also a challenge when you're working with local produce, as Lance said. It's almost always more expensive. And, currently there aren't other food hubs that are like Spork working with prisons. So Spork is bidding against the mainline suppliers, such as like US Foods, which is 100% always going to be lower in price. So it's just a challenge. And I hope that maybe down the road, there might be a couple other food hubs that we would be bidding against so that at least one of us could get the sale because we'd be bidding against probably competitive prices against each other.
Thanks, Hope. And then Lance, do you also want to kind of talk about CDCR's motivation behind Harvest of the Month?
Yeah, absolutely. And there was a couple of really key points that were mentioned, both from Hyla and Hope. Hyla mentioned the fact that there are some food service operations that do prefer those vendors that we've been working with for some time who can provide mass amounts of fresh fruits and vegetables. We love those folks that can help us out there. And it is important that we can rely on these individuals, because when we're working to feed 3,000 folks at one correctional facility, that's the average population at each facility. We want to make sure that we have something to provide them come meal service. And like it was mentioned before, because the areas of these correctional facilities are sometimes rural, and the requirements that are provided to us through law prevent us from just going to a local grocery store to purchase something to make up for a delivery that was not met. So while that is important, I love the fact that we have found how to work with food hubs. Correctional facilities aren't used to purchasing from small farmers or medium-sized farmers because, as Hope mentioned, they're unable to provide the 22,000 pounds of fresh fruit and vegetables that we require every single month of the calendar year. So when we find a food hub that can work with multiple different small farmers, it's really a good opportunity to continue working with the businesses that are here in California. And thank you, Hope, for talking about how much of an impact it is for these small farmers, because it's really nice to hit things on different levels, right? We're supplying the population of correctional facilities with a new item, something for them to look forward to. Our staff that are in food services and our correctional staff see the change from the population, that we're listening to them and trying to do everything that we can to just create a better, experience from being in such a bad experience, if I can put it that way. So I think that the Harvest of the Month program that we're doing right now is huge. And again, when we are looking at the different vendors' bids when they come through, we are looking at the lowest price. Assembly Bill 778 requires it to be from California, at least 60% of our purchases, but it doesn't mention price. And so that takes effect in December 2025. So we're working towards figuring out, hey, which fresh produce is out there? Where's it coming from? How do we obtain it? in the Harvest of the Month program, purchasing that one piece of produce each month for each correctional facility is really helping us build on our knowledge once Assembly Bill 778 comes through. And so my hope is, and what it looks like, is that come January 2026, it doesn't matter that Roma tomato wasn't the lowest price. What matters is that it actually came from California. Hope mentioned that US Foods is one of our bigger suppliers, and it's true. And a lot of their produce is grown and produced in the United States, which is great, but it doesn't comply with Assembly Bill 778. So if we're not able to say that that Roma tomato from US Foods was grown and produced in California, it gives us a harder time to purchase that item. So I definitely see some movement here with purchasing the local fruits and vegetables. So it's definitely a good thing. We have a ways to go. Hyla did mention that I am a champion for Harvest of the Month and growing locally, purchasing locally. But I'm not gonna lie, when I first heard this, knowing that budget constraints are so detrimental to the work that we do, I wasn't sure how we were gonna do it. But also, like Hyla mentioned, the support is not just here with me. We have the governor of California supporting it. We have the Secretary of California Department of Corrections supporting it. And so there is that support. And really some of the support is also with our food service staff, right? Our food managers that are at the correctional facilities. And it's really just showing them the benefits of purchasing locally. Again, it's not that they're resistive to providing fresh produce from California grown places. They're not resistant to providing that to the population. They're really just looking at the budget. We want to make sure that we are doing right for the taxpayer, right? Because I pay the same taxes that you all pay. And really there's a lot that goes into it. But it's really that support that we're getting from as high as the governor and even from the institutions. You know, we started the Harvest of the Month program in July of last year. And the first 3 institutions that we presented this pilot to, the first 3 correctional facilities that we presented this pilot to, they were full of ideas on how we could do it. But again, they were restrictive and resistant, a little resistant to the budget portion of it. However, that being said, now we're 9 correctional facilities in, and we're seeing a very steady process going through each institution that is brought into the pilot. And thank you for bringing up this slide. This slide really highlights, you know, where we're starting and where we're expanding to. So if you look at the center of Northern California and Central California, there's a cluster of institutions there, and it's similar to where Hope's farm is at in Davis, and we're really just kind of expanding out from there. And so as we look at these 9 institutions or correctional facilities that are piloting this program, we're seeing less and less resistance. It's becoming more of a streamlined process, and I see nothing but good things coming with the Harvest of the Month program. Thank you, Hannah.
Yeah, thanks, Lance. Yeah, so as you mentioned, you know, Spork Food Hub was able to serve at least our first 9 facilities. I think there's some talk about Spork being able to reach a few more within Central California. At this point, however, we still have plans to reach all the way up to the Oregon border and all the way south near Mexico. So as we're continuing to work through this with our scheduled rollout to reach by the end of 2025, there are still some opportunities to invite more food hubs as partners in our project. Let's see, next slide, please. Thank you. And so this is just Harvest of the Month numbers at a glance. This is only showing between July 2023 when we first started until January. So CDCR has spent approximately $33,000. This is probably even closer to $40,000 after we've wrapped with our February Harvest of the Month item. Approximately 28,000 pounds worth of produce has been served to the incarcerated population, and over 9,000 people at this point have been participants in the Harvest of the Month program as well. Something I did want to kind of touch on when it came to CDCR's experience with Harvest of the Month, we've heard directly from food managers who have really gotten excited about the fact that they're able to serve a variety of produce. Like on the previous side, we spoke with someone and he was like, I haven't served this in, what was it, like 12 years. So that was really indicative of us knowing like, okay, we're on a good path here because we're getting so much more support. It really does take a lot of buy-in from the ground up again and top down just to make sure that there is good change and there's good promise for the way that things are going. And also from another food manager, we've heard them say that, Harvest of the Month has opened the doors for us to purchase items that we otherwise would have been questioned about. So that was specific to the kiwi purchase. They were able to look for more kiwi and see if that would work within their budget to continue serving it on a more consistent basis. And so next slide, please. Oh, great. And now Carolyn will actually describe the work that we've done to increase access to fruits and vegetables through our nutrition education workshops.
Thank you, Hyla. So I know we talked a lot about the Harvest of the Month program. This one will be a little bit shorter since it doesn't involve Hope and Lance as our partners. But in order to also increase access to fresh California grown produce when folks come home from prison, and also educate those about the benefits of California grown produce, as well as just nutrition information generally. Our Farm to Corrections team organized nutrition education workshops for people with lived experience with incarceration, as well as their loved ones. And we held 12 workshops from October 2022 to February 2023 in 8 cities in California. And you can see the map I shared in the PowerPoint slide here. Similarly, as far south as San Diego and as far north as Humboldt County. And they were attended by around 135 system impacted individuals and led by facilitators with lived experience. So this was something that was really important to us in our Farm to Corrections team. It was important that the folks who were delivering this information had lived experience with incarceration, knew what it was like to eat inside, come home, kind of navigate the challenges, as Hyla pointed out earlier, in terms of they haven't cooked for this themselves in upwards of 20 years or shopped for themselves. So it was really helpful when facilitators were kind of able to share their own personal experiences with attendees. We also evaluated the success of these workshops with post-workshop surveys, and we'll share a little bit about what we learned from those surveys. And all of the pictures that we include in the next few slides were taken at our workshops. So you'll recognize Hyla and I in some of them, but they also include our participants, facilitators, co-hosts, things like that. So in our workshop curriculum, we discussed food during, after incarceration, as well as food and trauma. So it was also important to us that this wasn't just your average nutrition education workshop curriculum. We borrowed a lot of the materials from CalFresh Healthy Living or SNAP Ed, because there's a lot of overlap between the populations that qualify for SNAP or CalFresh and the population that's experienced incarceration. So we borrowed a lot from that curriculum, but we also expanded it to include more information about food, specifically during and after incarceration, as well as the relationship between food and trauma, because a lot of people who have experienced incarceration either came in having experienced trauma or certainly experienced trauma while inside. So it was important to us to actually address that and talk about it. We also talked about barriers, including structural barriers to eating a healthy diet. So again, we wanted to sort of go take it one step beyond the traditional nutrition education workshop curriculum and talk about things like food apartheid, food desert, structural racism, things that really impact the ability to eat a healthy diet, and in a way take the onus off of the individual and say, there are actually structural things at play here. And I think we found that participants really appreciated that because it kind of gave them words with which to describe things that they've experienced. You know, people would come up and say, you know, I never noticed that all of the food at my grocery store growing up was really unhealthy. And then when I went across town to the much wealthier part, the foods were all beautiful and fresh and so much healthier. And talking about this in this workshop has really helped me see that and understand that. And I didn't realize that that might have been particular to me and not something everyone would have experienced. So we also talked about some of the nitty-gritty components of a healthy diet, the benefits of all food groups, including fruits and vegetables. We shared practical strategies for selecting and preparing fresh produce. So people really appreciated. We shared websites with information how to actually cook produce. We shared recipes. We shared information about how to select produce. So like how to tell if something is ripe or not ripe. And then we also shared food assistance resources. So again, getting at the fact that eating healthily can be expensive. So we shared resources for participants with how to find food pantries, food co-ops, community gardens, even things like food policy councils. So ways for people to get engaged in their local system, maybe have a say in promoting food justice, topics like that. And we handed out these resources at the end of the workshop, and they were all tailored to their geography. So whether it was San Diego or Humboldt, it was kind of within a certain radius of where the workshop was held. So here's just some figures kind of communicating the feedback we got regarding the workshop. So as I said, we conducted workshop surveys and a little over 100 people filled them out. So we got some good information from those. We also conducted in-depth interviews with 8 of the people who've filled out surveys. We conducted interviews with workshop facilitators, so the people actually delivering the curriculum. And then we also conducted surveys with workshop hosts. So the organizations, these were mostly community-based or reentry organizations. And for those that aren't familiar, reentry are organizations that their job is specifically to help people transitioning from incarceration to the community. And we found the workshops were really well received. Almost everyone who attended the workshops felt they learned about where to find fruits and vegetables, how to prepare them. Around 80, a little over 80% reported an intention to consume more fruits and vegetables. We include some quotes here. One of my favorites is that one of the workshops said that after the workshop, she started including vegetables in breakfast and not just dinner. So I really liked that one. Workshop facilitators also really liked them. As I said, they really liked kind of conducting outreach, meeting people face to face. These were really community building spaces too. People lingered, people talked and connected after the fact. And hosts also felt that the workshops went well and were relevant to their members. So moving forward, as Hyla discussed, we have plans to expand the Harvest of the Month project, and as Lance talked about, and Hope. We also have plans to expand the nutrition education workshop. So our plan coming up is to actually implement what we're calling a train the trainer model. So our plan is, Hyla and I had been conducting all of these ourselves in collaboration with facilitators and co-hosts, but our idea is to actually recruit community-based organizations to hold these workshops and train people with lived experience with incarceration to deliver them in partnership with their organization and at their own community. So our goal is to conduct, I think it's 25 more workshops over the next few years and recruit community-based organizations. So similar to Hyla and Hope's plug in terms of finding more food hubs, if you're a community-based organization that feels like this might be relevant to your members, definitely connect with us. But this is something we're also really excited to do and offer. So here are a number of resources. I'm also going to pop them in the chat once I stop sharing my screen. But we've put together a number of reports and fact sheets about this work, and you are welcome to read at your leisure. Most of them are from the Farm to Corrections team. The final one is one published by Impact Justice just on the state of food in prison nationally. The rest are more California specific and regarding our project, from the nutrition education workshops to a fact sheet about 882, and sorry, I always get that wrong, 822, and reports detailing our efforts to increase procurement of locally produced produce. So I'd just like to name a few acknowledgements, our project partners, as well as our advisory council, stakeholders, community advocates, formerly incarcerated interviewees, and all those that helped us put together nutrition education workshops. And I'll pause here for questions.
Thanks for wrapping, Carolyn. I did see some questions in the chat feature and then also in the Q&A. Okay, let's go with the Q&A first, and then I'll kind of sift through the chat. So the first one that we received was, or an open question is, what about selling to correction departments in other states? I can kind of start with this one and then Hope if you wanted to follow up. So with this project, this partnership that we have, we're really hoping that we can kind of take this out to other conferences and other DOCs and share about what we're doing. In the brief amount of time that we've actually started Harvest of the Month and we've been sharing with some of the other DOCs or Department of Corrections, there's just been so much interest and so much like learning that's wanting to be done about like how to engage local growers. And again, trying to reconcile the DOC's budget and then also with the pricing of those smaller local farms. But hopefully we can create this model and share it out more widely. And again, like really establish those market channels so that it does make sense for folks versus defaulting to the larger vendors. Hope, any comment?
I don't really, I mean, I think, yes, the idea is to create something that will work in other states. If there are people out there who want to connect with me and chat about just what it looks like on Sporks, and I'm happy to do that.
Thanks, Hope. Our next question is, how do you deal with larger stigma of, spending more money on food for prisoners? Seems like there's challenge enough to do for school kids and less of the stigma exists. Lance, do you want to take that one?
I figured that would go to me. Thank you, Hyla. And yeah, no, good question. You know, I've worked in the department since 2009. You know, I've seen different models that the state of California is attempting to look at our incarcerated individuals, look who is being released back into the communities, and see who's coming back in. And it's what we refer to as recidivism, right? So we're always trying to reduce our recidivism. We want to put out a good product, and that product is, unfortunately, the folks that are in our care. We want to see them go back to society and be productive members of society. And so really what we're looking at right now, it's called the California model. I'm not sure how many of all of you are familiar with it, but what we recently did, we looked at Norway. The institutions in Norway have a very low recidivism rate. Their recidivism 20 years ago was just where the Department of Corrections was sitting at a while ago, at about 65–70% recidivism. So that means 60 to 75% of the folks that were getting out of their care came right back. And so, you know, looking at it through over the years, seeing the recidivism rates so high for California, that is not our goal, right? I mean, sure, it'd be great job security, but at the end of the day, none of us want that, right? So when we're looking at giving an experience for the population that's in our care and making it more normalized, I think that, you know, providing something other than an apple a day or a banana a day or a food tray that really just meets the needs nutritionally, but isn't appealing to the eye or the taste buds, I think that really helps us in justifying paying the additional price for the fresh fruit or vegetable. At the end of the day, I'm a taxpayer as well, and so I want to make sure that I'm being that we're being smart with this. But really, it's a balance, right? And so I think that finding that balance and again, making sure that the folks that are, you know, in our care, you know, get out and don't want to come back, I think is a great way to do that. And believe me, working for the department again for 14 years, I've heard it before. If we make prison not such a great place to be, where they're getting fresh fruits and vegetables, maybe they won't come back. But that's not the case. Prison for so long hasn't been a great place, yet they're still coming back. And so if we can maybe normalize it a little bit more, we're hopeful that we'll see that recidivism rate go down a little bit more. Good question.
Yeah, Lance, I think you answered it so well. Something that we do within the Food in Prison Project, especially because this is like our bread and butter, just to be, food puns, love it. But really it's about changing the narrative about the people who are incarcerated, right? Like at the end of the day, they are people in a situation. And so whether that goes down even just to the way that we refer to these individuals and humanizing them, restoring their human dignity, that is definitely something that we try to do when making those same parallels with improving the food for school children, right? Like at the end of the day, those children are just children. At the end of the day, people incarcerated are just people. And same thing with the, for the question that was asked by Allison, how can we really change the paradigm when it's perceived that the focus is on business rather than the human health of a person? And so again, really just looking at it as this individual needs continued support because of a medical condition that they've experienced. We've heard from currently incarcerated residents who unfortunately are experiencing, kidney disease, for example, and they're really looking for ways to help support their own medical needs through the food system. But because we have people at the table who are willing to first and foremost listen before, shutting us down for any, requests that we have, even as a Harvest of the Month idea. At one point, it was just the department thinking, well, how can this even happen? But again, with constant conversations and really just showing the value of why we should implement this, I think that that is really just the beginning of changing that paradigm that was mentioned. Other questions. So how many of these institutions are growing some of their own food? I'm curious if there are workforce development pathways to becoming farm managers or producers or nutritionists, irrigation, solar, green waste, and compost specialists. Are 60% of California producers implementing healthy soil / climate smart practices?
That's a great question. And I almost think that within that question is the answer, right? Because there are so many different variables when we're looking at the soil, when we're looking at the irrigation, there's a lot of things that go into figuring out how to produce our own vegetables, or do we rely on the experts like Hope and the folks that she works with? So at this time, I can say that out of the 32 correctional facilities, none of them are growing their own fresh produce and vegetables and supplying it to the general population that consumes the regular diet. That being said, there are 12 correctional facilities within CDCR who have gardens that do produce produce and herbs. And within those 12 correctional facilities, there are 19 gardens. So, sometimes our correctional facilities are 700 acres large, right? So there's opportunity to have these different locations for the gardens. So there are 19 gardens within CDCR. I'm not going to lie, I am a supporter of having a self-sustainable place where we can grow our own fruits and vegetables. But again, having such a big, so many different institutional facilities, correctional facilities, and so many variables that go into it, we're just not there yet. So at this time, 0 of the institutions are supplying their own produce and vegetables. They do rely on these vendors to supply that, but we are digging into having small gardens that grow herbs and produce and things like that.
Thanks, Lance. And Hope, are you familiar as to the 60% question? If farmers are using the smart, sorry, it disappeared from the screen. Healthy soils. The second part of that question, or the last part, was, are 60% of California producers implementing healthy soils / climate smart practices.
And Hope, maybe if you
60%?
can't, oh yeah, I was gonna say, and if you can't talk to all of California, maybe you can talk about some of your growers that participate
Yeah.
in your food. Sorry.
Yeah, I really can't talk to all of California. There are just so many growers in California, but I think that there's definitely most growers in California are leaning towards climate smart practices and regenerative farming. All of the growers the Spork uses, all 50, utilize those practices and yes, those are the types of farmers that Spork works with.
Awesome, thanks. And then another question for the both of you. So for Hope and Orland, do correctional institutions host bids for specific items often versus all or nothing orders? Or is that something you had to work with specific institutions to get them to work with you on?
I can just speak to my experience with it, and I think Lance can kind of speak more to the general process, but we've had institutions send us bids. So most institutions bid monthly for general produce, but that is not the case across the board. Some have told me that they bid quarterly on produce, which makes it a little more tricky. So we'll get monthly bids, and almost all of those are coming to us as an all or nothing bid for the general produce bid for that month. And they will have things on there like bananas or frozen things. And so I have just been contacting them and asking if they would accept an item by item bid. And some of them will. In fact, when I ask them accept an item by item bid, and then I just have to check this little box that says, this is an item by item bid. Some will send bids that have certain items highlighted that say these are seasonal items only. You can bid just on these items if you would like. And as far as frequency of bids, I also get some kind of random bids. Like I'll get I need mandarins, or I need broccoli, and it's just one item on the bid, and it doesn't really say, it's unclear to me where those types of bids come from. But we do get occasionally also just single item bids throughout the month. So yes, I have been working and having conversations with some of the nutrition staff about how we could work together on item by item bids. And I think that to my surprise, there are some institutions and some nutritional staff that are very open to that, and actually sending me emails that say, hey, I just need this one item. Is that something you carry? And if you have it, would you fill out this bid? So that's exciting and also progress, which makes us all very happy. But it's kind of all over the place as far as frequency goes. So yeah, maybe Lance can speak to more to that.
Actually, you hit the nail on the head, Hope. And I think what you're doing with contacting them, following up with them, and really just asking them, hey, are you able to bid on, or can I just bid on this individual item? I think that really helps, and I know we're coming close on the end of our time. So I just really want to wrap this up by saying that because we are a huge, huge organization, California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, we have a big onus to supply the fruits and vegetables and all of the food items that we have within CDCR. Sometimes it's really hard to pivot and just say, hey, I know we've been doing these things for so long, and so we're just going to keep doing it this way. It's really easy to say that, but we're about embracing change. We're about growth and evolution. I think that we're at a pivotal point here within the department. And I just want to say thank you for the questions. Thank you for my fellow presenters, and Carolyn and Hyla, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you everyone for attending, and thank you to our panelists for joining us today. If anyone has any questions or follow-up, or maybe want to learn more either on the Food Hub side, correction side, or just our project side, feel free to reach out to us. We are available through Sched, but can also share our emails in the chat.
All right. Thank you, everybody. That was great. Thank you to all the panelists and the attendees for joining us. This was the last one of the first days for the Small Farm Conference, but we hope to see you tomorrow and the day after and the day after. We have so much more. So yeah, thank you and have a good rest of your weekend.